Jacob is wealthy enough that if we do these things, then we they've got to pay a dowry to do their wives, and eventually all that they have and all the wealth that he has and all their flocks and all those things will belong to us, and we will all be one people. So they thought it sounded like a good deal, and so every male in the city, young, old, everywhere in between, was circumcised. So, and then 3 days later, while they're in pain, two of Dinah's older brothers, Simeon and Levi, go in with the sword and they kill all of the men in the town. They start off with Shechem and Hamor, and then they take their sister out of the house. She'd been under basically house arrest. We could, you could almost call it kidnapping or criminal confinement. There's a lot of different ways we would look at it today. And that's kind of where we're going to pick up today. So we're going to start reading in Genesis 34, verse 25. 3 days later, while all of them were still in pain, two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords, attacked the unsuspecting city, killing every male. They put Hamor and his son Shechem to the sword and took Dinah from Shechem's house and left. The sons of Jacob came upon the dead bodies and looted the city where their sister had been defiled. They seized their flocks and herds and donkeys and everything else of theirs in the city and out in the fields. They carried off all their wealth and all their women and children, taking this plunder, everything in the houses. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me by making me a stench to the Canaanites and Perizzites, the people living in this land. We are few in number, and if they join forces against me and attack me, and I and my household will be destroyed." But they replied, should he have treated our sister like a prostitute? So the two brothers go in, Simeon and Levi, and they've killed every man in there. They started with Hamor and Shechem, and they rescued Dinah out of their house. And it's one of those things that we talked about a little bit the last time. And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to, why would you do that? And it's more than just what we would call a revenge killing or anything like that. That was part of it, but there was sometimes in cultures back in those days, the problem we have with some of these things like this is we try to bring those stories 3,500 years into the future and judge them according to the ways that the norms of our cultures and our ways and all of that. This would not have been that much, so much out of the ordinary with things that they were doing back then. There were what we called honor killings. There are some of those that still in some cultures it goes on today. If somebody was hurt, if somebody did something to someone in your family, then you had to strike back, and there's with gangs and a lot of stuff like that. There's still some of those things going. There's still some cultures that do that today. We have a niece and her husband that lived down, they moved in a subdivision outside of Franklin, and didn't realize that they were the only white people in it, and they weren't blacks. It was another culture from another continent, and almost the whole subdivision was made up of those people. And one time there was cops everywhere and all that kind of stuff because one of the fathers got mad about a daughter doing something, and that she had disgraced a family, and the reason the cops were called is the father picked up a sword and is going after the daughter, and the son is trying to defend his sister. This was in, I don't know, that's been 6-7 years ago, maybe 8, because they're, and so they decided they needed to move. But anyway, so those things still go on around in places today. We think that some of those things only happened back then, and they're not part of our culture, but that doesn't mean that they don't occur. And that's the way it was back then. And it kind of comes down to the last line of the chapter, should they have treated our daughter or our sister like a prostitute? And actually the word's a lot stronger. It's prostitute's kind of the cleaned up word. It's basically like a whore is the word that would translate it better. It's really a put down. So they're going in now. Why would they kill all the men?
thought you could come back on them.
Martha said so they wouldn't anybody come back on them. And that's exactly right. I mean, you go into any place and you kill the leader and the heir apparent, you're going to have problems. So if they were going to kill one, they just about needed to kill them all. Or there would be another war. It wouldn't, then they'd be having a battle and not just this thing. So
Even babies, male babies?
no, they didn't do the babies.
They didn't
Well, it says
do
but we read down later about children, so the
Okay.
children were okay. And basically the fighting age men, and is what they went in and killed. Now all the babies even would have been circumcised,
Yeah.
but they didn't. They just went after the men, and took out all the men so that there could be no. You go in and you do a retaliatory strike, and then what you got to worry about is a counter strike, and so that's why they have to do that. And if they were going to do some, they about had to do all. And as if that wasn't bad enough, then what did their other brothers do?
They go in and loot it.
They went in and looted the place.
Everything and everyone.
Everything, Martha said, she was right, everything and everyone. There wasn't anything left. And why would they do that?
Everybody can come.
They really shouldn't have, even according to the cultures and things back then. But, now you could leave the women and children, but what were they going to do and who was going to be responsible for them and all those sort of things. And you were probably, this is just my opinion, to have left them probably would have set them up for somebody else coming in and doing the same thing, because there wasn't anybody there to defend them, to stand up for them, or anything else. Now to take them and so, it wasn't a good thing. It wasn't a bad thing. It was a normal thing back then. And we read this like it's an individual story, but if you think back and to the time of Abraham, and what did Abraham have to do? He had to go and rescue Lot because 5 kings come in against 5 other kings. They wiped out the army, and what did they do? They took the women, the children, all the goods, and took off. And Abraham had to take his army of 350 men, and along with a couple of allies, and go and rescue them back. So this was, part of it was just the way that people lived in those days. We got to remember that we can't equate that to the way of our modern society and understand the ways things were in ancient times and all that. Now, to go in and totally loot it and to carry it off, and the way that it's written, it wasn't just one of those things where they just kind of went in and picked and chose. They took everything, and didn't leave anything. It says that they they looted the city, the flocks, herds, donkeys, everything else of theirs in the city and out in the fields. They carried off all their wealth, their women, their children, taking as plunder everything in the houses. So, they didn't leave anything. So it was, and as much as anything, that's what seems to upset Jacob, because then it becomes a looting, and then they don't. The other brothers kind of cross the line. You could kind of accept what the ones did who were standing up for Dinah and all that, but then to go in and absolutely, I mean, the way it's written, they went in, where the dead men were and took everything that they owned and all that, and so you have that kind of lack of respect for everything. So now, when Jacob hears about everything that happened, how does he react?
He was upset.
Who's he upset at?
His brothers. Simon and
Yeah, just the first 2 originally. And what's he say to him?
Well, they brought trouble to him, and because if those other 2 groups joined together, they could wipe him out.
Yep. So Jacob takes it. Jacob was always a little bit practical about things, and that's where we see him here. He's worried about the practicality of it. Now, you went in and you took revenge on this town, but what happens if the Canaanites and the Perizzites and all those come back on us? And he's concerned about whether there might have been some sort of retaliation for some of the other peoples in the land. There was not, but he didn't know that that was going to happen, or whether they were allies or anything along that line, or even come along and say, well, look at what these guys did. We need to do that same thing to them. What he's concerned about, wipe them out, take all, because we can take not only what they took out of Shechem, we can get all their stuff too, and we could be doubly rich as they were. But he is concerned about whom. He didn't mention anything about whether what they did was right or wrong, right?
His house.
And he really didn't condemn them. He's saying, look what you've done to the family and the trouble you've put me in and the place that you've stuck me. And we kind of see that a little bit, that kind of attitude of Jacob as we go through the story. And, like when they were starving and they need to go back to Egypt in the Joseph story to get the second round of food, what held it up? He didn't want to be grieved. He was more concerned about his feelings and his loss than it seemed like than even his grandchildren dying and all those kind of things. So he is a little bit about that, but he's concerned about what's going to happen. And they kind of, the best defense is a good offense, right? So they come right back at him, and that's where they say, what should we have done if they treated our sister this way? And here, they've taken it, because, we've talked about it, the way they say daughter or sister and what her role was. Well, here they move it back to sister, so that they're saying we had to take responsibility for our sister. Basically, you didn't take responsibility for your daughter, so we had to take responsibility for our sister, and kind of pushing it back at him, almost like you didn't do anything, we had to. Somebody had to stand up for the honor of the family, and we had to do it. And it seems to get dropped there. Now, one of the things that does happen that we see when Jacob is going through the blessings of all the 12 sons towards the end of the book, that he does, he takes them to task at that time over these things. He doesn't seem to do it now, but it does come up later. So now, and what was the unique thing as we finish up Genesis 34 we talked about last time? God's not mentioned in chapter 34. If you look back at the very last line of 33, it is, there he set up an altar and called it God the Great of Israel, or Mighty is the God of Israel. So the last line of 33 is about God, and the first line of 35 is about God, and God is not mentioned in 34. Now, one of the things, too, about it to understand, and this is one of those things that makes that really comes down to making the Bible true, or what the Torah and what the Jews considered the value of this first 5 books, and why it gives so much weight, and why they think that it came from God and not from men. If you were writing a story about your heroes and the people that you descended from and all that, would you put something this bad in it? And probably not. And so, but it's there. And why is it there? Because God wants to make a point, and some of these points are going to come up later. But it also shows the people, warts and all. These weren't, people that were set up on a pedestal. They made their mistakes. They had their issues. They did things. They weren't perfect. And it's kind of like we said this morning. You won't find a family in the Bible that is not dysfunctional in one way or another. And so that's part of what we're looking at here. So moving into chapter 35, then God said to Jacob, go up to Bethel and settle there, and build an altar there to God who appeared to you when you were fleeing from your brother Esau. So Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, get rid of the foreign gods you have with you, and purify yourselves and change your clothes. Then come, let us go up to Bethel, where I will build an altar to God, who answered me in the day of my distress, and who has been with me wherever I have gone. So they gave Jacob all the foreign gods they had, and the rings in their ears. and Jacob buried them under the oak at Shechem. Then they set out, and the terror of God fell upon the towns all around them, so that no one pursued them. So now they're there. They are concerned about everybody. They're in the area of Shechem, and what does God tell them? Time to leave. And where does he call him back to? Bethel. What's that mean?
House of God.
House of God. And what was significant there? What did he see there?
Jacob's ladder.
Jacob's ladder, where we get that term, or the stairway, and where the angels were ascending and descending. Remember, they weren't descending and ascending. There's a big difference. Angels were on the earth, they went up and they came back. If they weren't up, and they came down and went back up. So he's going back there. And what did he tell God in that place? If you'll stick with me till I get back to this place, then you will be my God. So now God's calling him back to there. And God himself, this is the only time that God tells any of the patriarchs to build an altar. They all build our altars, but they build them on their own. This time God is telling them, you need to go back there, build your altar, settle there, and stay, and all these things, so that God is saying, you need to go back. I've fulfilled my commitment. What are you going to do, is what he's saying to him here. And to get back to what are you waiting on? And makes it known that he is the same God that appeared to him at that point. In other words, I've been with you the whole way, and I'm with you back to there. It's time to get back to there. So what's Jacob tell all of those that were in his household? Well, first let me ask you, what's his household? When they talk about his household, what were they talking about?
His wives, his servants, his kids.
Is that all? But she said wife, children, kids.
Everything that's his property.
Everything that Marty said, everything is his property. That's it. So it would have been all the people that belonged to him was his household. So these people that he has captured from Shechem, the ones that he had from the men servants and maid servants that is said that he had with him by the time he gets here, and all of the rest. And so, but it does include his wife and kids. And so this whole thing about foreign gods is something that comes up, and a lot of people question about, did his wife and kids have foreign gods? And the answer is maybe. And what would make us to think about that?
Oh, we knew Rebecca had them.
Rebecca, yep. Or Rachel. Rachel had them. She stole her dad's gods, and he didn't even know about it, and all those sort of things. He may have found out it since then. There were others. And so now that when God's basically saying, Jacob, you need to come back. I promised I would bring you back here. You said that if we could do all that, I will be your God forever. It's time for you to prove it. And so Jacob is making them get rid of all these things. Get rid of your foreign gods, purify yourselves, change your clothes. So, it's kind of that Sunday go to meeting clothes type thing. Not very many of them had to change clothes. Then let's go up to Bethel, where I will build an altar to God, who answered me in the day of my distress, and who has gone with me wherever I have gone. Now, the other thing about that, too, with all these other peoples that were there especially, and we see this kind of thought that runs through the whole Old Testament and pretty well into the times in the New Testament, especially in Acts and some of Paul's letters and those sort of things. People believed in what they called geographic gods. You had a god that was over a certain area. And whether it be a country, a territory, a city, every city had its gods. That's where Paul gets into his big thing. And in Ephesus, great is, Diana the Ephesians, or Artemis, the same thing, depending on which language you're using. And, she came down, landed here, and her temple's here. She's the god of this town. And here, we even see it in one of the places where you can see that people believed that there were geographic gods over certain things. Was, you remember what Naaman did with Elijah? After he got, he dipped in the river 7 times, and what did he ask to be able to do? Take dirt back with him. He loaded up the camels with the geology and from the geography, and took them back with them to be able to worship on that soil, the same as worshiping upon the soil of Israel. And they actually even believed in them battles, two battles. There's the spiritual battle that are being fought between the gods, and then there's the battle being fought on the ground between men, and the battle between the gods determined the battle between the men. And you even see, like with the Babylonians and the Assyrians and some of those that, they always say, our gods are stronger than your gods, and that's why we're winning and all those things. Well, what God is saying here is, I was the one that was with you here, there, everywhere. That God is the God of it all, that He is the monotheist, and this is that movement back to monotheism that's going to reign throughout and even to us today. And so, what did they give up?
All the fake gods. Little
They give up their gods, and what else?
Earrings.
Earrings. So why would they have to give up their earrings?
They're good luck charms.
Exactly what they were. They were what we would call good luck charms or amulets, good luck amulets. They would be, I'm probably getting, there are some people who may not like this too much, but there are people today that still will wear, not just good luck charms or things like that, but some of the, like St. Christopher or different ones like that, St. Michael, things that are supposed to protect them and to have, if you got that on. And even, there were people who used to wear the emblems of certain saints to protect them on the water, certain sailors and different ones. Or, there were some that were supposed to keep you from getting lost and all those sort of things. When you put your faith in the amulet or not, it's a little bit more than it's a good luck charm. It's not like a rabbit's foot or something like that, but it is something that was supposed to ward off evil or bring about good. And some of them had things like pouches in them or like the... what was the Indians used to call medicine bags and all those sort of things. It was certain stuff that you had. It either had emblems, it had things in them, it may have spells written on them, and all those things. And it's basically get rid of that. So that we're not talking about jewelry, and this is not a thing that says, when Jacob said you're not supposed to be wearing earrings, or men for that matter, that's not what it's about. It's about the type of earrings. They actually have a name for it, talamets or something along that line. And so what do they do with them? Bury them. And so it's kind of a symbolic there and all that, and bury them under the oak at Shechem. So everybody would have watched it, and so they set out, and other people would have heard about it. And did they have to worry about where they traveled? Nope. It says, and this is kind of an answer to what was Jacob's fear after Shechem?
Combined.
Yeah, the Canaanites and the Perizzites are going to come after us. So God takes care of that. And it says the fear of the Lord was upon them. The terror of God, not the fear, the terror of God was on them. And that's something that's kind of a forerunner of what's going to happen when Joshua brings the people in about 500 years after this. It talked about that their hearts melted like wax and those sort of things because they knew that God was on their side and fighting for them. And this word about, Jacob and the blessings and, how he went from nothing to all that he's got in that short period of time, and all those stories would have been traveling along and around, and it would have made people afraid to do anything with them. So nobody pursued them. They left, and the Canaanites and the Perizzites probably said, "Good riddance," as they were going. So they get there. Jacob and all the people with him came to Luz or Bethel in the land of Canaan. This is reading again at verse 6. There he built an altar, and he called the place God's house of God. And because it was there that God revealed himself to him when he was fleeing from his brother. Now Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died and was buried under the oak below Bethel, and so it was named the Oak of Mourning. So Jacob does it. People are afraid of him. He travels. He gets there, and what does he do as soon as he gets there? Builds the altar that God told him to build, and he called it God's house of God, or the God of the house of God. So it's God's house. That's Bethel, and it's this God's house. So it's kind of a little play on names, but it almost seems redundant, but it had emphasis on it. This is God's house of God. You can have a lot of houses of God, because what do we call this? You call about every church building house of God, or synagogues a house of God, or mosque a house of God. But this is that's what he was saying. This is the house of God. And you can have a lot of houses of God, but this is the one. Because it was there that God revealed himself to him. There was the stairway and the first revealing to him as he was fleeing from his brother. Now, why do you think it mentions Deborah, Rebekah's nurse?
She was important for some reason.
Yeah, nobody knows why. So usually, we've told you, like when it mentioned Dinah a long time ago, get ready, she's going to be in there. It mentions this one, it mentions that one. This is the only time that we even hear her name. It talked about her when Rebekah left her father and her brother's house to go get married to Isaac, and that she took her nursemaid with her. Didn't even mention her name at that point. Now, some of the Jewish scholars think that when this was written, that a lot of people may have known more about her. That it's got lost over the time. I don't know, but this is the only thing we have about her. It's one of the few places in which it just mentions a name and a circumstance. It doesn't play into the story before or after or all that. The only other thing is that she's got to be way up there. If she was Rebekah's nursemaid, which meant she started taking care of Rebekah when Rebekah was born, and now we got all this time, she's up there. And so there may be that had some significance to it at the point of her age when she did die.
But did it ever say why she was with him? Because wouldn't she have been with Rebekah?
No, she would have been with Rebekah, but it doesn't say. It just says she didn't say that she was with him, but whether he went to where she was and buried, because it doesn't tell us where the Oak of the Morning was, and below Bethel somewhere. But Isaac and Rebekah are still going along, and so we're going to get to Isaac here pretty soon. So we really don't know and those two words, that just means the Oak of Mourning. So verse 9, after Jacob returned from Padan Aram, that was up where Laban and all that was, God appeared to him again and blessed him. And God said to him, your name is Jacob, but you will no longer be called Jacob. Your name will be Israel. So he named him Israel. So now he's come back there from where he went, up in where Laban was, and he's come back down here. And so what does God do now? But didn't he already do that?
Because he wasn't officially going by it.
Yeah, he's not been officially going by yet. And that was a messenger of God that fought with him at the river. And here it is God saying, this is it, And there's a little bit of significance to it because they've come back to where? Bethel. And remember what we said a couple minutes ago? That agreement was Jacob said, if you're with me till you bring me back to this place, then you will be my God. And that's where he calls it. This is God's house. This is my God's house, Bethel. And so God says, okay, if that's what you really believe, then you need to know that not so much I belong to you, you belong to me. And so I'm changing your name. And it goes from being the deceiver to being struggles with God. And so God named him. And it just wants to reemphasize to us that it wasn't just an angel or somebody like that that named it. This is God. And when God does it, that's the way it is. So verse 11. And God said to him, I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and increase in number, A nation and a community of nations will come from you, and kings will come from your body. The land I gave to Abraham and Isaac, I also give to you, and I will give you this land to your descendants after you. Then God went up from him, and the place where he had been, and at the place where he had talked with him. So Jacob set up a stone pillar at that place where God had talked to him, and he poured out a drink offering on it. He also poured oil on it. Jacob called the place where God had talked with him the house of God. So, God, what does God call his name here? He doesn't say his name, it is a title.
I am God Almighty.
God Almighty, which is what in the Hebrew? Amy Grant had a big time song with it. El Shaddai, God Almighty. And then, so, in other words, I'm God, right? He doesn't say I'm one of the gods. I am what God? The God Almighty. And there's nobody greater. They call it the first law of theology. It says that God is the greatest being that there is, because if he wasn't, whatever was would be God. You kind of understand that. So whatever is the greatest being out there is God. And that's what he says. I am God Almighty. There is nobody, nothing, nowhere, anyway, anyhow, that is greater than I am. So what else does he tell him?
Get to the form multiply.
And what does that sound like?
Abraham.
Well, no, that's getting into the rest of it. Be fruitful and then multiply. That's that's Genesis. Be fruitful and multiply. I told Adam and Eve that a couple times, because they started off with a few and they got to be all of us. So it's kind of the same thing here. In other words, there's going to be a lot of you. Keep going. It's not just about you, because what does the multiplication got to get to? They use two examples always in there.
All the stars in the sky are all the sands.
Yep, stars in the sky or the sand on the seashore. That's what you gotta be and got to get to. So you gotta be fruitful and multiply to be able to have those kind of descendants. Now, there's two things that he tells him here that, and it comes back to the promise of Abraham too. That's kind of a little bit different and a little bit in agreement between Jews and Christians, because what does he tell him? He actually tells him three things.
A nation and company of nations would be kings, and that they would come from his own body.
Yep. All right. First one is you're going to be a nation. That's a singular, right? And then there's going to be a community of nations. And then there's going to be kings that will come out of your loins. So what we have here is your people are going to be a nation. And then besides you, not in your direct descent, because we come back to it with the third thing, there's going to be this community of nations. Now, that goes back to Abraham. And what did God tell Abraham? Through you, all the nations of the world will be blessed. Well, the Jews see that as saying that through the Torah, through the monotheism, through what we call the Judeo-Christian ethics, through the things that the first 5 books of the Bible teach, that the Jews are supposed to be the moral conscience of the world, and that's the blessing upon this community of nations. And what Christians see it as, that is the Christ, that was more than just the Jewish people. That the Messiah is not just about that Jewish leader. It is about people that are not of your race. The nation is of their race. And then he comes back to, when he's talking about kings, where are the kings going to come from?
His body.
From your body. They're going to be your physical descendants. Kings are going to come from you. Now, nobody's even thinking about kings now, right? And so we know that eventually it's going to be Saul, and then David, and the Davidic line all the way down to Christ. So that's the kings. And we have 4 books, 2 in Chronicles, 2 called Kings, that are nothing but about the kings that came out of his loins and the descendants of Jacob. So we actually have three parts of it. You're going to be a nation, and and of course there's going to be, this is going to be your land and all that. There's going to be how you're going to affect the community of nations beyond you, and then there are going to be kings that are going to be attributed to you. And at this point, all they are is basically is a tribe. Father, grandfather, whoever, you've got the patriarch and everybody underneath him, and they're all related by blood. And so, and God is saying that what belongs to him?
What belongs to?
God. Basically everything. And so God is saying, I give you, it's not, God gave it to Abraham, gave it to Isaac, now he's giving it to Jacob. But it's not that so much that Abraham gave it to Isaac, Isaac gave it to Jacob. God said, I gave it to them, I give it to you. It's mine to give to whoever I want it, and I'm giving it to you, and I'll give this land to your descendants after you. God's going to give it to them. It's not a matter of what people think. And so when God's done talking, what did he do? He hung up. And I used to know an old gal down in Vincennes. That's the way she didn't say goodbye or anything when she'd be talking on the phone. Remember we had phones with cords and when she was done, she just all you knew is the phone went quiet because she did, and that's kind of what God does here. He got done talking. There wasn't anything else to discuss. He doesn't leave anything open for. There is no discussion about any of this. Nothing to be debated. I've stated it. I'm gone, and that's what it is. So. Jacob sets up again another stone pillar. He'd done that once before. And what does he do with it?
Pour
Drink offering, which would have been probably wine and oil. And so, there's a lot of rocks over there that are like pillars. They're long and narrow. He stands one up, and that doesn't mean it was perfectly shaped or whatever, but he stands a rock up. This should be laying down. He stands it up, pours these things on it. So anybody else coming that way sees something important happened here. So it's about anybody else coming on, but more than anything, it's about the rest of his descendants. This is the marker of what has happened. This is for the rest of the family to see. When your kids grow up, you show them that. You bring them down here, you tell them about it and all that. That's the witness. And that's what they mean sometimes when they say, let this stone, let this whatever be a witness between us. It means when people see that this is something that's not the way that nature would have had it, somebody did this, something important happened. What was it? Well, let me tell you about that. And that's kind of how that all goes. And so he calls it that place, again, Bethel. He renames it the same thing. So, verse 16. Then they moved on from Bethel, and while they were still some distance from Ephrath, Rachel began to give birth and had great difficulty. And as she was having great difficulty in childbirth, the midwife said to her, "Don't be afraid, for you have another son." As she breathed her last, for she was dying, she named her son, "Son of my misery." But his father named him Benjamin. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is, Bethlehem. Over her tomb, Jacob set up a pillar, and to this day, that pillar marks Rachel's tomb. So they're moving on, and doesn't say exactly where they were going, whether they were going back to Succoth, because that's where they had built houses and things, or exactly where he was going, but he was moving on. God didn't say, come up and live at Bethel. He said, come back to Bethel, build me an altar. So he has done that. Now, it looks like they were heading towards where? Bethlehem. Or Ephrath. Or we read it usually on the second Sunday after Christmas. And Bethlehem, Ephrathah. Out of you will come. That part's usually early. What we read about here is with the what they call the slaying of the innocents, when Herod killed all the little boys 2 years and under. what is it? What's the quote there? Rachel crying for her children because they were no more, and so it's kind of a reference back to here, and that she was at Ephratah, and Rachel was one that was not buried with the rest of the family, and why would that have been?
Not close enough.
Yeah, because they weren't close enough. They buried them where they had to be. He marked her tomb, which usually wasn't anything that was done. So, you remember what Joseph's name stood for? What actually his name was? We call him Joseph. I hope I have another one. Was basically his name. I mean, just kind of roughly translated. And we talked about it then, that when her wish came through, it would be her last wish. So she has another one. And who came to be Benjamin. But, it means son of my trouble, son of my misery. And so that's what she names him at the last. She does know, I mean, she is conscious that she has a little boy. And she puts that name on him at the very end as she was dying. But what does his father do?
Names him Benjamin.
Yeah. Ben, anytime you see Ben, B-E-N, and anything that means son of. And later in the New Testament, it's Bar, as in bar mitzvah, which is a son of the law. But Benjamin, he changes him to, it can be one of three things. It can be son of my might, or of my right hand. It can be son of the south, because that word can be, it's used in different ways, which kind of makes sense. They're in the south, or about as south as they had been. Or the other one is son of my days. And why would that be a good possibility? Because he's an old man, and when he has Benjamin finally. So
How old
what?
would they have been?
By this time, he's probably over 100 or right around it, because we're going to see here really quick about his dad and how old his dad was. So, she dies at Bethlehem, Ephrath, or Ephratah, as it gets to be called later. And she's in a tomb. He didn't put her in the ground, right? She's in a tomb. Now, the tomb could have been down in the ground, but we think of graves. They didn't have graves. They usually used tombs. And for the main reason is you can't really dig too much over there. So he sets up a pillar, and to this day, when would this day have been?
The same day.
About 500 years after this was written, and about 3,000 years ago. So and that's the point I wanted to make. When you read those things, it says to this day. Don't take it as to this day, to the day that it was written, because there's a lot of times that we read in the Old Testament and that says, and to this day, it's still the way it is. And people think, well, that's just 2022 right now, man. That's long. That's not what it means. It means to the day that it was written. And so it still marks Rachel's tomb. And supposedly you can go over there and find it. It's one of those things, I don't know how accurate it really is and all that. So now, verse 21. Israel moved on again, pitched his tent beyond Migdal Eder. And while Israel was living in that region, Reuben went in and slept with his father's concubine, Bilhah. And Israel heard of it. Jacob had 12 sons. The sons of Leah, Reuben, the firstborn of Jacob, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. The sons of Rachel, Joseph, and Benjamin. The sons of Rachel's maidservant, Bilhah, Dan, and Naphtali. The sons of Leah's maidservant, Zilpah, Gad, and Asher. These are the sons of Jacob who were born to him in Padam Aram. So, now, seems kind of odd, doesn't it? Well, for one thing, did you notice anything that, as we were reading, a big change?
Well, then,
Do what?
now Israel.
not Jacob anymore.
No, Israel heard
He's
of it.
Israel now, and it changed. So even the writer is changing it. So he goes, and while he's in Migdal Eder, which wasn't real far away, what happens? Yeah, Reuben goes in and sleeps with his stepmother, or his wife's concubine. So now there's a reason for it. You may not think it's a good reason, but there was a reason for it. You got any idea what the reason was? It kind of goes along this reason I read on about the 12 sons, because the sons are listed by what?
Oldest.
Order of birth.
They're listed by mother,
Where are you?
because they're not listed in birth order. Benjamin and Joseph are listed as number 7 and 8 in the line. So, and in this case, Leah is mentioned first in this thing here because she is alive at that time when it's written, and Rachel is dead. So that would have put her in front of Rachel. But who's next?
Rachel.
Bilhah.
Oh,
And, huh?
After Rachel.
After Rachel, yeah. Leah, Rachel, Bilhah. So, one of the things we've seen about Reuben was he was fairly loyal to his mother. Because what did we see him doing earlier? Remember the mandrake story? Jacob wasn't sleeping with his mother, so he goes out in the fields and finds the mandrakes in order to kind of the aphrodisiac, so to speak, and fertility drug. It was considered to be both. Try to give him to his mother, and there's the whole thing of the swap between the two of them and all that. So he's trying to take care of his mother there, and he's actually trying to take care of his mother here. Because Leah had always been what? Second. Who was always first? Rachel. And so now Rachel's out of the picture. And the next one that's listed in the line is Rachel's nurse, or Rachel's maidservant, rather, not her nursemaid, her servant. And so he wants to make sure that she does not become number one. And the only way he can do that is if she's defiled, then that moves her basically down to the bottom. So most scholars think, and theologians think, he's going in, he does this, and it doesn't say whether it was willful or unwillful. It just says that he did it. And you got to remember too, what's the age difference? She's old enough to be his mom, basically. And so this is not a love thing. This is not a sexual thing, like an erotic thing, or that he is infatuated with her or anything like that. Most believe this is a thing where he's going in trying to make sure that his mother is no longer number two, but finally gets to be number one. And so when you look at that like that, it makes a little bit more sense and why this story is in there. And again, it kind of comes to the validity of the Torah, these first 5 books, when it tells stories like this. Because otherwise, if people were just writing a history of the family, you usually don't put the bad things in. And so he goes in, sleeps with his father's concubine, and Israel heard of it. And what did Israel do? Doesn't look like he does anything at this point in time. Again, we see it will come up at the end, and he kind of dresses him down at the end of his life. But here we don't see him doing anything. And it's also interesting that usually, you get listed according to importances, and that's what it's doing here. But typically when the sons are listed, they're listed how? Birth order. And we don't have that here. Like I said, the last 2 are actually listed as number 7 and number 8, because Leah had half of the children herself. She had 6 of the sons, actually, and Dinah. So she had 7 of the 13. And now, verse 27. Jacob came home to his father Isaac in Mamre near Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac had stayed. Isaac lived 180 years. Then he breathed his last and died, and was gathered to his people, old and full of years. And his son Esau and Jacob buried him. Now, Isaac was about 40 when they got married. And they went 20 years with no kids, so he was about 60 when they got married. So he has lived how long since he was 60 when they were born. So how long has he lived?
180.
Yeah, he lived 180, which was 120 years after. And so the other thing too is that here's the other irony in it that you need to stop and think about. Why did Jacob leave in the first place?
Because he received blessing.
Because his brother said, when dad dies, I'm killing him. And then what did they expect?
He killed when he got there.
Any day dad's going to die. That's the whole reason that he brought him in, to give him the blessings. He couldn't see. He couldn't hardly taste. He brings him in. He can't tell who's who. And he lives all this time, probably another 100 years, 70 years, 80 years, 100 years after that, depending on how old Jacob and Esau were when they had the whole birthright thing. So if he had stayed at home, it probably would have been a whole different set of circumstances. He wouldn't have had to worry about Esau. Esau finally got over it, as we see. And so he's been out going through all the things in his life that he's had to gone through because he was afraid about what was going to happen in the meantime. And now when what he was afraid was going to happen happens, we see just the opposite that occurs. So he comes home to Hebron, and Hebron still to this day, to 2022, is still considered to be the home of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And it is one of the most fought over towns because of that. Because, of course, it's in Israel. It's in the, quote, occupied territory. So who do you think both claim it? What two major religions in the world claim Abraham as their predecessor, or the Muslims and the Jews? And so they've been fighting over which, he's my dad, no, he's my dad, he's our ancestor, no, he's our ancestor, and who does it belong to? And so as a matter of let's see, it's been 27, almost 28 years since I was over there. It hadn't changed since then, that you can't go to Hebron. It is such a dangerous place to go because of all the fighting and the bad feelings and all that kind of stuff there. But it's still considered to be the town of Abraham, one of the few that still has the same name. And so he's 180 years old when he died. He breathed his last, and what?
Everything gathered.
And gathered to his people. Now, what did we say that stands for in the Torah? It has a different meaning in Kings and Chronicles. Unless you're a Sadducee. Where were his people?
They'll live right around there.
No, but it says he was gathered to he breathed his last, he died. And then he was gathered to his people.
Oh, they took him to the place where they buried all of them.
Well, that's what it means in the Kings and Chronicles and all that, but that's not what it necessarily means here. Because who were his people? He only had 3 people. Isaac did. When you look at that kind of family, Abraham, Sarah, and Rebekah, and he wasn't buried with they're definitely not buried with Rebekah, and Rachel wasn't there. She's already died, but he's being gathered up with all of them. This is believed to be a reference to the resurrection, and that's what we talked about even with Abraham. when Abraham died, he was gathered with his people, and so, you know, and then we get into Exodus, and God says, you know, and Jesus quotes Jesus quotes Moses at the burning bush with God speaking to him. As God said to Moses, and which Jesus repeats, I am the God of Abraham, I am the God of Isaac, I am the God of Jacob. And Jesus says he's the God of the living and not of the dead, that it's all the way back there. And so this is a reference that he has gone to be with God. It's not just that he was put in the ground and returned back to the dust, that he is gathered to his people. Old and full of years. Wouldn't you say that's kind of an understatement? Old and full of years. And so, who buried him?
His sons.
His sons. And now, does there seem to be any animosity between them? No. You know, one of the things that I've noticed, and even before I got into being a pastor or anything, is that funerals will either bring people together or it'll blow a family apart. And here, it brought them together. They've already settled all the things about who gets what and all that kind of stuff. If Abraham even had anything left over at this point in time. But one of the things, you know, we say a lot of stuff about Esau, you know, and he kind of, you know, it says he spurned his birthright and all those. But the one thing you see about Esau was that he was always conscious of his father. He was always what we would call a good son. You know, he was close to his father. You know, that's what, you know, Jacob was close to his mother, and that was the whole deception thing, and all of that. But even back in the beginning, he was not going to do anything to Jacob while his father was alive. He didn't want to put his father through anything like that. He comes back here and he buries his father, and everything he does seems to be centered on he wants to serve his father. Well, the whole point that people kind of throw him out and think of him as a bad person is because it says he spurned his birthright, and maybe he wasn't worthy of getting the blessing or that all those things. But also, you know, it even tells us that he went out and he got him a couple, which we're going to get into here in a little bit. He got him a couple of wives, Abraham Isaac and Rebekah weren't real pleased about it. And so then the wives he got after that, he got wives that would have pleased him. He got them from Ishmael, Isaac's brother, and family girls and all that sort of thing. So he kind of gets a bad rap for a while, but he was attentive. He was family oriented. When it finally came time to make up, you know, he doesn't come with any animosities towards Jacob, you know, and only takes the gifts because Jacob more or less forced them on him, offers to leave him an army or to travel with him to bring him down to where he is. Of course, Jacob says, no, we don't need that. You know, the women, the children, the baby animals, they can't travel that fast. You go on ahead. Well, I'll leave you some soldiers. No, take them with you, because Jacob went and took his right turn at Albuquerque and went the other way. And so, you know, we don't want to overly judge Esau from that one instance that he had. And even with his temper that raged out at that, I know a lot of people that probably would have reacted the same and maybe even said the same things, whether they meant it or not, if they thought, you know, that they were very wealthy and they were going to lose what all they thought they were going to get and all of that. So his sons together buried him. And even in this one, Esau is again listed first. This is the only time that we've seen him listed first in a lot of it. And it comes back to now, in this last part, Jacob is called Jacob again because it's almost back to his old way. I mean, not his old ways of doing things, but his family, what he was known as the family, and all of that is there. So we'll pick up with chapter 36 next time around. We're really close on time. May even be a minute or two over. So hope you got something out of it, and we'll catch up with you either Wednesday night or next Sunday morning or Sunday night. So go out, be blessed, and be a blessing to others.